Welcome to a spiritual offering from Trinity Episcopal Church in Boonville, with the sermon of Mother Linda Logan for the last Sunday after Epiphany.
The wolf is the guest of the Lamb on that holy mountain, and the calf and the lion shall lie down on that holy mountain. Together they shall rest with the child on that holy mountain. On that holy mountain, on that holy mountain of the Lord, no harm or ruin. On that holy mountain, that sacred day shall be filled with knowledge. There shall be peace, led by all the children on that holy mountain, on that holy mountain, on that holy mountain of the Lord. The poor shall receive from the rich on that holy mountain, and the sick and the lame shall be healed on that holy mountain. Troubled shall find comfort there on that holy mountain, on that holy mountain, on that holy mountain of the Lord. No harm or ruin on that holy mountain. That sacred day shall be filled with knowledge. There shall be peace, led by all the children on that holy mountain, on that holy mountain, on that holy mountain of the Lord. Justice shall flower for a time on that holy mountain, as long as the sun still can shine on that holy mountain. Peace till the moon be no more on that holy mountain, on that holy mountain, on that holy mountain of the Lord. No harm or ruin on that holy mountain. That sacred day shall be filled with knowledge. There shall be peace, led by all the children on that holy mountain, on that holy mountain, on that holy mountain of the Lord. Holy and peaceful the day of the
In the name of the one holy God, Creator, Redeemer, Sustainer. Amen. If you say, "You fool," "You idiot," you will go to hell? If you look at someone with lust, you have already committed adultery? Aren't these statements a bit extreme? What is going on here? To answer that, we have to look at these statements in context. Where we are is in the middle of the Sermon on the Mount, that great compilation of Jesus' teaching, which occurs in the 5th through 7th chapters of Matthew's Gospel. We have heard the Beatitudes, Jesus' declarations of what constitutes blessedness. And if you recall, Jesus' ideas of blessedness were countercultural, both for his time and for ours. For what he said was that blessedness consists in being poor, sorrowful, and humble enough to recognize and accept the gift of God's presence. We have heard Jesus tell his disciples that they are the light of the world, and that he is not the antithesis of the law of Moses, but the fulfillment of it. And where we are right now is in a discussion of that law. Now, if you had enough coffee this morning, you might have noticed that in the midst of that barrage of statements we just heard, statements that Matthew tells us came from Jesus, there is an interpretation of 3 of the 10 commandments. Did you notice? Which commandments are they? You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain. But rather than just cite these commandments, what Jesus does is interpret them. And not just by giving the meaning of the commandments on their surface, but by explaining the intent that lies within them. Let's look at these. You have heard that it was said to those of ancient times, "You shall not murder. And whoever murders will be liable to judgment." But I say to you that if you are angry with a brother or sister, you will be liable to judgment. And if you insult a brother or sister, you will be liable to the council. And if you say, "You fool," you will be liable to the hell of fire. Jesus is not finding fault with the original commandment. What he is doing in what is an escalation of offenses and judgments is saying that anger, insults, and defamation are as deadly as murder, for they cut people off from each other. He is parodying the way people split hairs as to the severity of sins and assign matching punishments. For there is a progression here in terms of sin, from anger to insult to the particular insult of "you fool," and in terms of judgment, from a local court to a higher human court to the highest court, which is God's. Jesus is satirizing the way human beings assign severity to sins. And he is doing this in order to help people see how they avoid the seriousness of what people do to each other. Anger, insults, particular words of defamation, they all kill relationship. They cut people off from each other. They are all murder in the eyes of God. You have heard it said, "You shall not commit adultery." But I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lust has already committed adultery with her in his heart. What Jesus is saying is that people should remove themselves from situations of temptation. He does not want them to tear out their eyes or cut off their hands. He just wants them to not look or reach out with physical desire toward another person, when that desire is not accompanied by love, which is both appropriate and committed. As for his teaching on divorce, it differs from place to place in the Christian scriptures, a fact which indicates that the early Christian communities who produced these writings had different takes on what Jesus said. What Jesus is saying here in this section of Matthew's Gospel is that divorcing a woman puts both her and any future husband in the position of committing adultery. And in saying this, Jesus is actually looking out for the woman in a divorce. He is addressing men, the only persons within Jewish society who could divorce their marriage partner. And men could divorce their wives for something as inconsequential as not cooking to their satisfaction. By the law set forth in the book of Deuteronomy, men could divorce their wives simply by providing them with a written certificate that removed any ambiguity about their legal status. People in that ancient time thought that such legal handling improved the situation. For remember, a woman alone couldn't survive in that society. She had to have an adult male to provide for her, for she had no rights. She was just property that was transferred from father to husband. But what Jesus says is that such maneuvers force the woman, and whoever then marries her, into adultery. The thought behind this, which he refers to in a later chapter of Matthew and also in Mark, is the intention expressed in the creation stories of the equality of the man and the woman, and of the two in marriage becoming one flesh, which, joined together by God, should not be separated. So, Jesus doesn't cancel the commandment on adultery. He radicalizes it, not to make the commandment more stringent, but to show people the pain that accompanies that human behavior. Again, Jesus says, "You have heard that it was said to those of ancient times, 'You shall not swear falsely, but carry out the vows you have made to the Lord.' But I say to you, do not swear at all, either by heaven, or by the earth, or by Jerusalem, or by your head. Let your word be yes, yes, or no, no. Anything more comes from the evil one. Jesus is not suggesting that oaths be simpler or stricter. He is pointing to the misplaced piety involved in persons getting around taking the name of God in their oaths. And he is saying that oaths shouldn't be needed at all. People should simply keep their word. So what we're encountering in this section of the Sermon on the Mount is Jesus' explication of 3 of the 10 Commandments and his expose of what people do to avoid facing the intent behind these commandments. His treatment of the law continues past these verses to his teaching on nonviolence, almsgiving, prayer, striving for the kingdom. But the teachings we just looked at are all that we have for today. And they are enough, for in them Jesus gets at the ways people kill relationship with each other and with God. And in doing so, he spells out much of the righteousness that constitutes God's kingdom.
I've got a home waiting in the heavenly kingdom,
Up where the streets are paved with gold.
and someday I know I'll be heading for the heavenly kingdom with a chariot to carry me home.
Swing
I've got a
low,
home
sweet
waiting in the heavenly kingdom, up where the streets are paved with gold, and someday I know I'll be heading for the heavenly kingdom with a chariot to carry me home. Looked over Jordan, and what did I see?
coming
For to carry me home. A shiny golden chariot waiting there for me. It's gonna carry me home.
Swing low,
Chariots coming,
sweet
chariots coming,
coming
chariots
for to carry me home.
chariots coming,
Swing low,
chariots coming,
sweet
chariots coming, yes, it's coming to carry me home.
My day is coming, as sure as can be.
Coming for to carry me home.
I hear a band of angels calling out for me.
They're gonna carry me home.
Swing low,
Chariots coming,
sweet
chariots coming, chariots
for to carry
coming,
me home.
chariots coming,
Swing low,
chariots coming,
sweet
chariots coming, yes, it's coming to carry me home.
Swing
I've got a home
sweet
waiting in the heavenly kingdom, up where the streets are paved with gold. And someday I know I'll be heading for the heavenly kingdom with a chariot to carry me. Chariots coming, chariots coming, chariots coming to carry me home. Yeah! This has been a spiritual offering from Trinity Episcopal Church in Boonville. We're glad you could join us this morning and hope you can again next week.